Welcome to this guided tour of Isaiah 40 verses 9 and 10 in the Greek. I'm working on a textbook for basic Greek, and in it I include some assignments that have a brief passage from a gospel and then a brief comment on that passage by a church father, usually St. Chrysostom. At the beginning of those assignments I include these verses from Isaiah. That's because the fathers viewed this passage in the light of the coming of Christ and the gospel writer's announcement of the good news. So, for example, these verses are quoted at the beginning of St. Thomas Aquinas' preface to his Catena Aurea for the Gospel of Matthew. And Aquinas goes on to say, "The prophet Isaiah, a manifest preacher of the gospel, briefly expressing the loftiness, the name, and the substance of the gospel doctrine, addresses the evangelic teacher in the person of the Lord, saying, 'Go up to the top of the mountain,' and so forth." And so Aquinas is saying that the Lord, through Isaiah, is telling the gospel writers to go up on the mountain and proclaim the good news. Aquinas then launches into selections from the fathers on details in the Gospel of Matthew, beginning with the word gospel itself. If you want to see some of the selections that Thomas has collected together in the Catena Aurea, it's available online, and I've given you one of the sites there. I've also listed the Perseus website. That's a very helpful website for getting at the parsing of words you don't know, especially outside the New Testament where you have other resources you could use. And also you have access to the Little Scott and Jones lexicon, the large LSJ. And that lexicon now has some competition because the Brill Dictionary is even more comprehensive, including some of the early patristic material that's not necessarily in LSJ. So let's read through our first verse. Ep oros hypsilon anabethi, ha euangelizomenos Sion. Hypsoson te iskiui ten phonensu, ha euangelizomenos Jerusalem. Hypsosete, me phaveste, epontais polisin Juda, idu hotheos humon. So we begin, as you see there in the map, with a prepositional phrase. And it looks like we have a nominative in a prepositional phrase, and of course that can't happen. So what's going on with this word oros? Well, it's a third declension noun. Recall the core pattern for third declension endings based off the indefinite pronoun. Since this is a neuter, we'll be using those endings over on the right. This is a pattern 5a third declension that has a stem shift between omicron sigma in the nominative and accusative singular and epsilon elsewhere. And so this form can be not only a nominative singular, as you see, but also an accusative singular, and that's obviously what we need here in a prepositional phrase. Our next word, hypsilon, is simply a 2-1-2 adjective from hypsilos aon, meaning high. So our prepositional phrase says, upon a high mountain. Our next word is a verb, anabethi. See beta eta, makes you think of bino. We have a word anabino here, and the the ending is one of the imperative endings. So here's the core pattern for the imperative endings. Now in the book I only list epsilon and son in the second singular actives, but occasionally the and u also show up. And that's what we have going on in our particular verse now. So we have a second singular active aorist imperative from the verb meaning go up. So upon a high mountain, go up. Our next word, euangelizomenos, is a participle. You can recognize it from the men followed by a adjectival ending. So it's either middle or passive. And it has an article with it, so it's going to be either a noun or an adjective. Since there's no noun around for it to modify as an adjective, it has to step up and be the noun. And this looks like a nominative singular form, and it is, but here it's functioning as a vocative. Recall that often vocatives share the same form as the nominative. Now in the lexicons you'll find this verb listed as euangelizo, but in much of ancient Greek it was actually a middle-only form, and in later Greek the active began to be used. And there's 3 places in the New Testament where that takes place. You can see Danker's lexicon BDAG for the details. Verbs that refer to communication are naturally reciprocal. In other words, their meaning includes a focus on both the subject and the object, and several such words are middle only. So for more of the mysteries of the middle and some of the recent thinking about it, see the introduction to it in Using and Enjoying Biblical Greek, pages 236 to 239. So this verb is a middle, but we're going to translate it in English as an active. So we have the one who proclaims good news. But since our main verb, anabethi, is a second singular, we'll translate this participle as you who proclaim good news. So upon a high mountain, go up, you who are proclaiming good news. Now what about Sion? Well, that's a transliteration of the Hebrew, Zion. And notice there's no accents or anything on it. That's often the case in copies of the Septuagint. And when you look it up, you see that it's indeclinable. We'll have a couple more words in our passage that are also transliterations from the Hebrew. Since it's indeclinable, we have to figure out from the context what it is. Euangelizomenos could take an accusative, but that would be used for the message that's being proclaimed. And Zion's not being proclaimed. We have the one proclaiming good news to Zion, so we're going to take this as a dative. So go up, you who are proclaiming good news to Zion. Our next verb, hypsoson, is an imperative. You see that son ending, the second singular active imperative, and this is going to be an aorist imperative from hypsao, meaning lift up. So use singular lift up. Iskiui is a dative singular in the third declension. That iota is our dative singular ending. You see that it's used for both the masculine feminines and the neuters. This is a pattern 6 third declension, which has stems in upsilon. It's the easiest of the third declension patterns since the endings just add onto that stem with no major changes. You notice in the dative singular, sometimes there will be a diaresis and sometimes there won't. So iskiui is a dative singular feminine, and of course the definite article right before it would have told us that anyway. Then we have tein phonensu, an accusative. That's going to be our direct object. So lift up your voice. And the dative now is not an indirect object. That's going to be a dative of manner. So lift up your voice with strength or with might. Or since datives of manner function basically like an adverb, you could translate this lift up your voice mightily or strongly. Then we get our participle again, that vocative form, sharing the form with the nominative. Euangelizomenos Jerusalem. Jerusalem is another indeclinable word. It actually occurs in several different forms. I'll give you the two most frequent ones here. And so we'll take this as a dative as well. So lift up your voice with might, you who are proclaiming good news to Jerusalem. Now going on, you see hypsosete, another form of hypsao, to lift up. Now you see the sigma alpha for an aorist and the te ending for a second plural. This is an imperative, so you all, or yens, lift up. And then me phobeste, another second plural. This is a present imperative with me, so it's going to be a prohibition. So we have a negative command. Me with the present imperative often signals a general command, though it can have the sense of stop doing something that's currently in progress. And since Isaiah 40 is addressing those in need of comfort, the context suggests they may well be fearful, and this message comes as a call to cease having fear. So what are they supposed to lift up? Lift up and don't be afraid. Well, the gospel proclaimer is supposed to lift up the voice, but here it's probably lift up your hearts, something to that effect, to go along with the don't be fearful or stop being afraid. Notice we have the shift to the second plural. We've had second singulars up to this point. So these two verbs are the message that's supposed to be proclaimed. Lift up, don't be afraid. Now with apon, our next word, we have perhaps the trickiest part in our whole passage, because that looks like a verb you're familiar with from the New Testament, which it could be translated I said or they said, second aorist from lego. But what we actually have is an imperative in the second singular active, and it's only the accent that's different. As you see from my note, this is the result of using a first aorist imperative ending, that son ending, on a second aorist stem, and then the sigma drops out, so we get our form. And notice the statistics I include there, that apon is only used 4 times in the New Testament, and ape is used 15 times for the second singular active imperative of lego, or apon. But in the Septuagint, it's just the opposite. Apon is used 111 times and ape only twice. So interesting difference of usage there between the Old Testament and the New. So after our two verbs in the second plural, we now return to a second singular, say, tais polisen. Polisen, the sen ending on there is our dative plural ending in the third declension. This noun follows the pattern 5b. It has stems that shift between an iota and an epsilon. This is one of those patterns where the sen ending in the dative plural is actually one of the easier forms to recognize because it doesn't get changed in any way, as it often does in the third declension. So we have a dative plural feminine, and of course again the article right in front of it could have told us that. So say to the cities, Judah. This is another one of the transliterated words from the Hebrew, and you see that sometimes indeclinable in the Septuagint, but often it follows that pattern that I give you there. So we have say to the cities of Judah, Idu hotheos humon, behold your God. Idu is actually an imperative form, but it's used as a demonstrative particle. In other words, an exclamation that's calling your attention to something. It's used frequently in the New Testament, as you see, 200 times and over 1,100 times in the Septuagint. Now the actual imperative form would have a different accent. So the accent shifts when it's being used as this demonstrative particle. And here, in this particular passage, it's translating the Hebrew word hine, which is very frequent in the Old Testament, and that's not based on any form of to see. It's just an attention-getting device. There's another word, ide, or ide, as it's accented in the New Testament, which is a second singular active aorist imperative from horao, or eidon. And that's used frequently in the New Testament, the Old Testament as well, and that's often translated behold or see. So both of these forms, idu and ide, can either mean to actually look at something or simply to pay attention to something. So it's not necessarily calling upon people to actually physically see something. And in Isaiah's context, it's a call to recognize that God is present and at work saving his people. But as the Church Fathers read this verse in the light of the Incarnation, it took on a new dimension, because God has now become visible in the person of his Son. So that expression, behold your God, that could be used as a caption to the Gospels as a whole. This is the one whose story they are recording, this one who is Emmanuel, God with us. Now we move on to our second verse. Idu, kyrios meta iskios erketai, kai habrachion meta kyrieas. Idu hamistos autu metautu, kai ta ergon in nontion autu. So here we have idu again. Behold, the Lord, kyrios, meta iskios. Iskios, again, you might think that looks like a nominative singular, but it's in a prepositional phrase. So we have another third declension. It's another example of that pattern 6 with the stems in upsilon. This time we have the genitive singular, os ending. So behold, the Lord comes with strength. Kai habrachion, that ending might make you think it's a genitive plural, but you have that definite article right in front of it that might steer you to a nominative singular, so we have to look it up. And indeed we have a pattern 3 third declension noun, and so that on ending is actually the zero form. It's just simply the stem itself with the omicron lengthened to an omega in the nominative singular. So we have and the arm, brachion, meta kyrieas. Kyrieas, that's a word that doesn't show up in the New Testament. So here's the information about it. And you see we have a genitive singular feminine. Notice that this is one of those nouns that retains the alpha through all of the singular, as you see from the lexical entry. With such words, we'll have the genitive singular taking the same form as the accusative plural. These are words that usually have a stem ending in epsilon, iota, or rho. And so you have to figure out whether you got a genitive singular or an accusative plural from the context. In our context, we have a series of meta phrases, each with a genitive. And besides that, if kyrieas was the accusative, then meta would mean after, and that wouldn't make much sense in this context. So we have another genitive. Now, the article with habrachion probably is that possessive. You remember the definite article can be used as a possessive pronoun. So we would say, and his arm comes with authority. Then we move on. Idu, behold, ha misthos autu, his reward, met autu, with him. As you see in the map, we need to supply some verbs here, grammatically anyway, although it can read quite well in English as well as Greek without these words. When words are elided like this, it's often for a rhetorical effect, and here it has a very punchy effect. So behold, the Lord comes with might, and his arm with authority, and his reward with him. Then our last part, and kai ta ergon, and the work is, understood, enontion autu, before him. And here's another place where that article works well as a possessive pronoun. His work is with him. Now it's not clear what work means here. The word in Hebrew, pe'ula, that's being translated here, can mean work, but also, as you see, wages, reward, or recompense. And most English translations go with one of these options. From what I can see in LSJ and the Brill lexicon, ergon is not used for these other meanings. The closest it comes to such ideas is that expression you see there, ergon krematon, literally work of money or monies. And there it refers to the interest or the profit on money. Now there's a very helpful old dictionary for moving from English to Greek that I've got listed for you there by Woodhouse, available several places on the web. And according to Woodhouse's English-Greek dictionary, the main word for the idea of wages or reward is misthos. And that's already been used here in this verse for a different Hebrew term, sakar. Now sakar also means wages or reward, just like misthos. So the translator must not have wanted to repeat misthos and went for a word that fits part of the meaning of the Hebrew word, but perhaps not the particular usage here. So that's a brief guided tour of some of the details in these two verses. Now let's read through the text one last time, and I've included markings from scanning so you can see the subunits within the different clauses and verses. Ep auras hypsilon anabethi, ha euangelizomenos sion, hypsoson te iskiui ten phonensu, ha euangelizomenos Jerusalem, hypsosete, me phobeste, epon tais polisin Juda, idu hatheos humon, idu kyrios meta iskios erketai, kai habrahion meta kyrieas, idu ha misthos autu met autu, kai ta ergon enontion autu.